I was a bad kid. In grade school, my friends and I used to knock down the bikes in the bike parking lot or push them into the ravine. We used to take candy away from other kids on Halloween, and once I stole a baseball from a store. In school, I didn't try very hard. I got B's and C's and sometimes was sent to the principal's office. Luckily, though, things turned around, and today, although I certainly haven't achieved everything I would like to achieve, and I know that I'm just in the middle of a lifelong journey, there are some people who might say that I'm a fairly successful person. So what happened to turn things around? That I can tell you in 2 words: classical music. My father, Joseph Golan, was an incredibly gifted violinist. At the age of 23, he joined the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and played with that world-famous ensemble for the next 49 years. For 35 of those years, he was the principal second violinist, one of the leaders of the orchestra. That's a picture of my dad in 1953 when he first joined the orchestra. Standing in the middle is the conductor Fritz Reiner. My dad is the violinist right next to him, standing up. And incidentally, sitting down is the great cellist János Starker, and next to him is the famous principal oboist Ray Still. They all joined that year, 1953. Here's a picture of my dad many years later comparing notes at a rehearsal with Sir George Solti. And here's a picture of my dad standing next to Daniel Barenboim. My dad is on the far right, then Mr. Barenboim, then me, and on the left is the composer Elliott Carter. My dad introduced me to the violin when I was about 2.5 years old. That's a picture of the 2 of us together at that time. The funny story behind that picture is that actually my dad was going outside to scold me. You see, I had taken my violin out of the house to play with it in the front yard, but I wasn't supposed to take it outside. It wasn't a toy. But then when my dad got out there to yell at me, he just couldn't help himself. He had to fix my violin position and my bow grip, and the planned scolding morphed into a violin lesson instead. Anyway, when I was a kid, I did not take music very seriously, and I did not practice very much at all. In fact, I can tell you how much I practiced. It was 40 minutes a week. How do I know that? Because 40 minutes was how long it took for my mom to drive me from our house in Highland Park, Illinois, to downtown Chicago, where I had my lessons. The only practicing I did was in the back of my mom's station wagon on the way to my lessons each week. I just wasn't that interested in music. I was more interested in other things, like baseball, football, and general horsing around. And it was during that period that I performed the mischievous deeds that I mentioned earlier. When I was 13 years old, my fed-up violin teacher, Mr. George Perlman, who had also been my father's violin teacher, sat me down, talked to me about my lack of discipline, and asked me if I really wanted to continue taking lessons. I said, actually, no, I really don't. We mutually agreed that it was time for me to quit. But then my mom stepped in. She said, why don't you just take lessons for 1 more year? That way you will have reached a level at which you'll be good enough to play in a community orchestra just for fun. But if you quit now, you won't be able to play at all. Okay, I said, I'll take lessons for 1 more year. But then during that year, 3 things happened that really turned everything around. First, there was the District 113 Community Orchestra Concerto competition. As my mom had suggested, I joined the local community orchestra, which was called the District 113 Community Orchestra. The conductor, Mr. Emmons, decided to hold a concerto competition in which any member of the group could audition to play a solo with the orchestra. Mr. Emmons asked me to audition, so I did. I really didn't have anything to play, but Mr. Perlman, my teacher, gave me this little student piece that he had written called the Israeli Concertino, and I threw it together at the last minute. I walked into the audition and proceeded to tell the panel of judges that I really wasn't prepared, but that I would try to play anyway. Mr. Emmons noted that to walk into an audition and tell the judges that you had not prepared for that audition was not a good idea. And he was probably right. Anyway, I played the audition and somehow was chosen as the winner. I guess it was sort of a big deal. My very first media appearance was in an article in the Highland Park Life previewing that performance. So now I had the solo appearance scheduled and I had to start practicing. Although I still didn't know what real practicing was, I certainly practiced more than I ever had in the past, although it wasn't all that difficult to surpass 40 minutes a week. In any event, I got the piece up to a fairly respectable level and was more or less ready to play the concert. However, there was this one passage that I was really nervous about. It was a passage that contained harmonics. Harmonics are a sort of whistling effect that one can attain on a string instrument. The passage went like this. Now, the thing about harmonics is that they're pretty treacherous. You have to put your finger in exactly the right spot or they sound horrible. And if you're nervous, they can sound even worse. Your bow arm tightens up and it starts shaking uncontrollably. So this harmonics passage, and especially being nervous about it, was a disaster waiting to happen. The night of the concert came and I was a wreck. Right before walking out to play, I was backstage with my knees shaking, my hands cold and sweaty, and I was just about wetting my pants. Nonetheless, I walked out and started to play my solo. Luckily, that infamous harmonics passage was toward the beginning of the piece, and somehow I got through it alive. It wasn't horrible. Then, little by little, I started to relax, and by the end of the piece, I was actually starting to enjoy myself. When I finished, I walked off stage and was greeted by my parents and my violin teacher. I said to them, "This is for me." It was at that moment that I decided I really liked playing classical music and that I would start taking it more seriously. Also, that classical music experience taught me a very important lesson. Sometimes you just have to go for it. No matter how difficult the task or how terrifying it might be, you can't possibly succeed unless you go out there and give it a shot. The second event happened a few weeks after that. At the suggestion of some friends from school, as well as my mom's insistence, I set off to attend the Interlochen National Music Camp in Michigan. This is a summer program that attracts students from all over the country and even some international students. When I got to Interlochen, I was told that they had a solo recital each week and that anybody could audition to play on it. I decided to audition for the solo recital that first week. I was feeling pretty good about my playing. After all, I was one of the best 8th grade violinists from Highland Park, Illinois, and on top of that, I had just won the District 113 Community Orchestra Concerto competition. I went down to the cabin in which they were holding the solo recital auditions. The cabin door was open, and the kid before me was still playing, so I stood there and waited for my turn. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was this tiny little 10-year-old kid that came up to my waist performing acrobatic feats on the violin that I didn't even know existed. Although I didn't know the piece at the time, he was playing the Scherzo Tarantella by Wieniawski. This is a virtuoso, professional solo piece of the highest level, and he was tearing it up. And here I am, standing there, about to walk in to play my little student piece, the Israeli Concertino by George Perlman, at about this level. I couldn't play my easy beginner piece 1/10 as well as this little midget was playing Wieniawski's Scherzo Tarantella. A lump the size of a golf ball started to develop in my throat, and everything became blurred. as the rush of tears flowed to my eyes. I did not walk into that room to audition for the solo recital. Instead, I turned around, walked directly to the practice rooms, and started to practice. I mean, really practice. I practiced all day and all night. I did the same thing the next day, and the next day, and the next day, for the next 20 years. The third event happened just a few weeks after that, still at Interlaken. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra, along with my dad, of course, was on a U.S. tour that summer with their conductor, Sir George Solti. One of the stops on their tour just happened to be a concert at the Interlaken National Music Camp. At Interlaken, this was the event of the year. People were talking about it for weeks prior to the concert, which was completely sold out. The Chicago Symphony was, and still is, one of the greatest orchestras on the planet. They have toured all over the world to great acclaim. They have made hundreds of recordings, and 62 of their recordings have earned Grammy Awards. Sir George Solti's 31 Grammy Awards, 24 of which were recorded with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, are the most by any musician in any genre of music ever. Solti and Chicago were coming to Interlaken. This was huge. After weeks of anticipation, it was the night of the big concert. Everyone was gathered in main camp. The geography of the camp was such that main camp was right in the middle, in between the orchestra musicians' dressing rooms and Kresge Auditorium, where the concerts were held. The only way for the musicians to get to the concert was by walking through main camp. This is a picture of an orchestra concert in Kresge Auditorium. I had the opportunity to visit with my dad for a few minutes in his dressing room right before the concert. Then, along with the musicians of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, I walked side by side with my dad, carrying his violin case right through the middle of main camp. Everyone was in awe. My friends, my counselors, my teachers. With their jaws hanging on the ground, they all made way for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. Now, I don't know if pride is a virtue or a vice, but all I can tell you is that I have never felt so proud as I did at that moment. Then came the concert. Sir George Solti and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra were magnificent. They played at a level that simply could not be exceeded. It was pure perfection. When they finished their final selection, the audience immediately jumped to its feet in unison and proceeded to give a 20-minute standing ovation. Sir George Solti left the stage several times and came back each time to bow, but the audience would simply not stop clapping. Finally, Solti took the hand of the concertmaster, the first violinist, and literally had to drag the orchestra off the stage. That concert set a level of excellence for which, to this very day, I am still striving to achieve. At the end of the summer, I came home from Interlaken and told my dad that I wanted to become a professional musician. He told me to forget about it. He said I wasn't talented enough and that I hadn't practiced enough to make up for my moderate talent level. I said, well, I want to try anyway. Okay, he said, then let's get to work. Even though he didn't think I could do it, he took me under his wing, gave me lessons as often as he could, and guided me through my musical training. The rest of my life has been an attempt to walk in my dad's giant footsteps and to try and make him as proud of me as I was of him. To quote the beautiful song by Dan Fogelberg called "The Leader of the Band," which was written for his father, my life has been a poor attempt to imitate the man. I'm just a living legacy to the leader of the band. From that point on, I wasn't a bad kid anymore. No more pushing bikes into the ravine, no more stealing candy on Halloween, and no more B's and C's at school. I became a straight-A student throughout all of high school, college, my master's, and my doctorate. Now I'm a university professor, professional conductor, and violinist. Although I still haven't reached the level that I would like to reach, and I haven't achieved nearly everything I would like to achieve, my pursuit of perfection through classical music, inspired by the events that I have just described, has helped me to achieve whatever moderate level of success that I have. My wish for all of you is that one day you have the opportunity to experience live orchestral classical music of the highest level. And if you get that opportunity, that it has a profoundly positive effect on your life as it has on mine. Thank you very much for listening.